The silence in the penthouse was shattered not by a crash, but by a single word spoken in a dead language that instantly restarted my dying wife's heart. Now, the mysterious cleaner who saved her life has vanished, leaving behind a ticking bomb threatening me with an accusation of aiding a grave conspiracy against the state. The penthouse smelled of money and sterile despair. I'm Elias Vance. You probably know the name, Vance Tech, the company that basically runs half the smart grids in the country. I had everything. The view of the city that never slept, the custom Italian suits, the kind of financial security most people only dream about in lottery tickets. But none of it mattered when Dr. Alistair Finch, the titan of modern medicine, looked me dead in the eye and told me my wife, Clara, had maybe 6 months left. Clara. She was the light switch in my perpetually dim world. She was vibrant, fierce, and utterly refusing to surrender to this rare, aggressive neurological disorder that was slowly turning her brilliant mind into static. We threw money at it, every specialist in Europe, every cutting-edge research facility in Asia. We flew in Dr. Tanaka from Tokyo, who insisted on experimental gene therapy costing more than the annual GDP of a small island nation. Nothing worked. The tremors worsened. The moments of lucidity became fleeting, precious seconds between long, vacant stretches. The atmosphere in our glass tower became suffocating. I remember sitting by her bedside one Tuesday watching the autumn sun catch the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt sacrilegious that the world outside could continue its mundane operations when mine was actively collapsing. I was exhausted, running on black coffee and the sheer terror of losing her. That's when Maria started working for us. She wasn't hired through any elite agency. There was no background check by a top-tier security firm. She was referred by Mr. Henderson, the grumpy doorman on the ground floor, who mentioned she was looking for quiet, after-hours work because her schedule was complicated. Her interview was less than 5 minutes long, conducted in the foyer while Clara was having a particularly bad day upstairs. Maria was maybe 40. Quiet, with hands that looked strong, not manicured. She wore sensible shoes and a plain, dark uniform. She didn't try to make small talk. She didn't gasp at the priceless art or look around with the greedy curiosity of the previous cleaning staff. She just looked at me with these incredibly direct, dark eyes, nodded once and said, "I understand what needs to be done, Mr. Vance. I start tonight." The first few weeks, I barely registered her presence. She cleaned between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. during the hours Clara usually slept fitfully, and I was usually locked in my home office trying to figure out if I could buy the company that was developing the next promising, albeit unproven, drug trial. But slowly things started to shift. The air in the penthouse felt lighter. Not chemically clean, Maria used eco-friendly, unscented products, but the oppressive weight seemed to lift slightly. Clara started sleeping through the night more often. When I checked the monitoring systems, her vitals, while still alarming, were statistically better than they had been under the care of 3 rotating shifts of registered nurses. I mentioned it casually to Dr. Finch during a video conference. He actually scoffed. "Mr. Vance, you're projecting. Sometimes stability comes before the downturn. Don't attach sentimentality to your domestic staff." But Maria wasn't staff. She was a silent guardian. One morning, I found her in Clara's room, not cleaning, but sitting beside her, humming a low, simple tune. Clara's hand, usually rigid or limp, was lightly gripping Maria's. When Maria noticed me, she stopped humming immediately, stood up and apologized profusely, ready to be fired. "What were you humming?" I asked, my voice raw. Maria looked down at her shoes. "An old lullaby, sir. It sometimes helps the restlessness." I didn't fire her. Instead, I started watching her. I'd pretend to work late, monitoring the security feeds from my office. I watched her patience. I watched how she adjusted Clara's pillows with an almost surgical precision, how she'd read passages from Clara's favorite obscure poetry books in a low murmur, even when Clara wasn't responsive. Then came the moment that made me question every single decision I'd made regarding Clara's care. It was 3 weeks before Dr. Finch's final grim prognosis deadline. Clara had a severe episode. She wasn't breathing properly. Her eyes were rolled back. I called 911, heart hammering against my ribs. The EMTs worked frantically for 20 minutes, trying to stabilize her while I paced a rut into the imported marble floor. They were preparing to rush her to the emergency trauma unit, a place where she'd likely endure agonizing interventions that only delayed the inevitable. Maria walked into the room, looking completely calm amidst the chaos. She didn't touch the equipment. She didn't shout. She simply walked to Clara's bedside, placed one hand gently on her forehead and the other near her heart, and she spoke one word very clearly in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. The effect was instantaneous and terrifyingly absolute. Clara's breathing normalized. The seizing stopped. Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time in months, they focused completely on Maria. She whispered something in return, a sound so soft the EMTs didn't hear it over their own frantic radio chatter. The lead paramedic stared at Maria, then at Clara's miraculously steady vitals monitor. He lowered his defibrillator paddles. "What did you do, ma'am?" Maria gently removed her hand. "I asked her to rest, sir." She agreed. I dismissed the EMTs. I canceled the ambulance. I looked at Maria, my mind reeling between the utter belief in what I had just witnessed and the fear that I was hallucinating from stress. "Maria," I managed, my voice shaking, "what are you?" She finally met my gaze, and the quiet confidence I'd always seen was laced with something ancient and heavy. "I am just the cleaner, Mr. Vance, but your wife needed something different than the best medicine money can buy." That night, I didn't go to my office. I sat by Clara's bed. She was lucid, more lucid than she'd been in a year. We talked for hours. She didn't mention the previous doctors, only Maria. "She understands the rhythm," Clara murmured weakly. The next morning, Maria wasn't in her usual cleaning slot. I checked her small back room, the supply closet she sometimes used for breaks, empty. Her meager belongings, a worn jacket, a small plain Bible, a cheap phone, were gone. Panic clawed at me. I had dismissed the professionals, relying on a cleaner who performed a miracle, and now she had vanished. I called Henderson, the doorman, frantic. He confirmed she hadn't signed out, hadn't been seen leaving the service entrance. It was as if she dissolved into the early morning fog. I went back to Clara's room, expecting the deterioration to resume immediately. But Clara was laughing, a soft, genuine laugh, at something she was looking at. "Clara, what is it? Where did Maria go?" She pointed weakly toward her bedside table. Lying there, nestled between the high-tech monitoring equipment and the prescription bottles, was a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It wasn't expensive. It looked old, perhaps handcrafted. Next to it was a folded piece of thick, textured paper. I unfolded the note. It was written in elegant, looping script, definitely Maria's hand. "Mr. Vance, I could not stay. What your wife needs now is not a cure, but a different kind of strength. I have given her a catalyst. It will not remove the sickness, but it will slow the clock significantly. She has more time now. Cherish it. However, such interventions are not without cost. When the sickness inevitably claims her, you must do exactly as I instruct in the attached document, or the time I have bought will be revoked. And worse, the network that protects your investments, the one you built with Vance Tech, will be compromised by an investigation into a severe national security breach, a highly complex financial fraud scheme that could lead to a charge of aiding a grave conspiracy against the state." My blood ran cold. A charge of aiding a grave conspiracy against the state? That was the language used in the most serious files I'd seen internally at the firm. I looked down at the second document. It wasn't instructions for Clara's care. It was a dense, legalistic paper detailing impossible actions, specific offshore transfers, contact with untraceable shell corporations, and an explicit date 6 months in the future tied to a massive data dump concerning national infrastructure vulnerabilities. It was a trap, a ticking time bomb planted not in Clara's body, but in my perfectly ordered life. I looked at the wooden bird, then at the note again, realizing Maria hadn't just bought Clara time, she had bought herself leverage over me, the wealthy, isolated tycoon who now owed an unseen debt to a mysterious cleaner. And the deadline was looming. My fingers trembled as I reread the instructions. This wasn't a whimsical threat from a woman claiming mystical powers. This was meticulous, high-level blackmail wrapped in a miracle. The language used in the attached document, the specific references to financial loopholes and infrastructure weak points, was far too precise for a simple cleaner. Someone highly intelligent, highly connected, and utterly ruthless was now pulling my strings. I immediately locked down my digital life. I pulled in my entire security team, the very people who vetted every single contractor, every new hire, every security update on our systems. I demanded to know how Maria, someone Henderson simply pointed to, bypassed every firewall, every identity verification protocol we had in place. The head of security, a former military intelligence officer named Marcus, looked like he was going to throw up. Mr. Vance, she isn't in any database. Not domestically, not internationally. Her fingerprints don't match any records we have access to. It's like she materialized here yesterday and vanished today. Materialized, I snapped, gripping the edge of my mahogany desk. People don't materialize. Someone cleared her. Someone orchestrated this. I showed them the note and the terrifying legal document. Marcus went pale. Sir, this section, this refers to exploiting the 10 gigabit fiber trunk line beneath Sector Gamma. That's restricted federal access. If this data gets out, or if anyone attempts these transfers, we aren't talking about financial fraud. We are talking about obstruction of justice related to national security vulnerabilities, a charge of aiding a grave conspiracy against the state that brings in agencies far beyond our usual purview. We had 5 months and 27 days until the deadline listed on the document. 5 months to either cure Clara, which the world's best doctors failed to do, or to navigate a labyrinth of illegal transactions that would instantly destroy my reputation and likely land me in a high-security facility for decades. For the next week, I became a phantom in my own empire. I couldn't trust my internal network, so I resorted to disposable burner phones and physical meetings in anonymous, rented spaces miles from the Vance Tech headquarters. I had to figure out who Maria was working for, because she was merely the messenger. The precision of the threat suggested a deep-seated grievance or an operation targeting Vance Tech specifically, perhaps related to the government contracts we held. Clara, meanwhile, was defying all expectations. She wasn't cured. The slight tremor remained, and the fatigue was still present, but she was alert. She remembered things. She asked about books we'd read years ago. She smiled without effort. It was a glorious, fragile truce with death, bought with a terrifying promissory note. One afternoon, while researching the origins of the bizarrely carved wooden bird, it depicted a very specific regional folklore creature from a remote part of Eastern Europe, I noticed something new. Clara was sitting up in bed, sketching furiously in a notepad I'd given her. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" I asked gently, trying to sound normal. She didn't look up. Maria showed me a pattern. She said to keep the pressure even. I leaned over her shoulder. She wasn't sketching a landscape or a portrait. She was drawing intricate, complex geometric patterns, lines, curves, and symbols that looked vaguely like circuit diagrams, but overlaid with the same strange iconography from the bird carving. "Clara, where did you learn this?" She frowned, concentrating hard. Maria drew it on the condensation of the window one morning. She said, "The structure holds the truth, Elias. Look closer at what holds the city up." The city, Vance Tech, the smart grid. Suddenly, my mind clicked into a horrifying gear. The national security breach listed in Maria's instructions wasn't about money laundering. It was a smokescreen, a way to force me to disable certain security protocols or open specific backdoors in our grid control software. The illegal transfers were just the noisy distraction, while the real operation, the physical sabotage or takeover of critical infrastructure, was initiated. And Clara, perhaps subconsciously influenced by Maria's catalyst, was now drawing the very blueprints for the attack. I snatched the notepad from her hands. "Clara, Where did she show you this pattern?" Her face crumpled instantly. The brief period of lucidity shattered. Her eyes glazed over, the familiar vacant look returning, and she began to cry silently, reaching for the notepad I held away from her. "It's all right, Elias," she mumbled, her voice thick and distant. "It's just the way things connect." I looked down at the paper, a precise schematic overlaying a known weakness in the central routing hub that controlled 3 major metropolitan power substations. Maria hadn't just bought time. She had turned my wife into an unconscious oracle, or worse, a conduit. Just as I was about to call Marcus back to tell him to lock down every system and prepare for a full-scale cyber defense, my secured phone, the one only Marcus and I used, chimed. It wasn't an incoming call. It was a system alert from the Vance Tech server farm located downtown. The alert wasn't an intrusion warning or a denial of service notice. It was a manual override command, initiated from a local terminal, labeled with the highest security clearance, my clearance. The command was simple: initiate full system diagnostic reboot on Substation Delta 7, bypassing all local fail-safes. Substation Delta 7 was the primary power nexus for the entire district where Clara's Hospital, the city's central communication hub, and the headquarters of the Federal Internal Investigation Agency were located. The reboot sequence had already begun. It would take 60 seconds to cycle down completely. If that substation went offline, the resulting surge, when it came back online, would fry every unshielded device in a mile radius, including the life support monitoring in our own building. And I hadn't issued that command, but someone had used my credentials. Someone who was either inside my inner circle or someone who could perfectly mimic my access signature. And the clock on the screen showed 52 seconds remaining. 52 seconds. The sterile quiet of the penthouse was ripped apart by the shrill, persistent sound of the system failure alert. 50 seconds. I slammed the wooden bird and Maria's legal threat onto the table, staring at the blinking countdown on my secured device. Someone was executing Maria's plan now, using the distraction of the approaching deadline to initiate the real attack, and they were using my digital ghost to do it. "Marcus!" I roared into the burner phone. "Someone spoofed my credentials. Delta 7 is cycling. Shut it down manually. Bypass the remote initiator." "I can't, Mr. Vance." Marcus's voice was panicked, static. The override command locked out all physical manual access points simultaneously. It's a complete system lock. It has to be disengaged remotely, but the software is self-encrypting faster than we can brute force it. 30 seconds. I looked from the phone to Clara. She was staring blankly at the ceiling, her breathing shallow again. The serenity from Maria's visit completely gone. She was trapped in the middle of a catastrophic event orchestrated by the very person who gave her reprieve. The complex schematics Clara had drawn flashed in my mind. Look closer at what holds the city up. It wasn't just about the grid's physical structure. It was about the underlying code, the Vance Tech proprietary architecture I had designed myself 15 years ago. Maria hadn't just brought a cleaner. She had brought an operative who understood the system's core weaknesses better than my own chief architects. She knew exactly where the true kill switch was hidden, the one I built in as a theoretical backdoor, a physical failsafe only accessible by direct, localized input to the central processing core, deep beneath the city center. 20 seconds. Marcus, forget Delta 7. The master core, level 6, sub-basement. There's a hard manual release panel behind the primary cooling unit, the one labeled Legacy Backup. It's analog. It's the only thing that won't be digitized. I screamed, already tearing off my silk robe and grabbing my keys. "Sir, that area is sealed off after the 2020 audit. It requires bio-authentication and 3 separate encryption keys." "I built it, Marcus. I know the fail-safe word for the audio lock. Tell them to clear the path. I'm going in." I sprinted from the penthouse, commandeering the fastest available service elevator. The trip down 40-plus floors felt like an eternity, compressed into 10 seconds. As the elevator doors hissed open onto the secure ground floor lobby, I didn't look at the confused security guards. I ran toward the service tunnels leading to the massive subterranean server complex that was the true heart of Vance Tech. 10 seconds. The air in the sub-basement was freezing, thick with the ozone smell of overclocked processors. I found the cooling unit, a behemoth humming with furious energy. The maintenance panel was tucked behind it, accessible only by sliding the 3-ton unit 3 feet to the left, a feat requiring specialized hydraulics. But there was no time for hydraulics. I spotted a heavy-duty emergency crowbar hanging on a nearby utility hook, a relic from the initial construction phase. I jammed the crowbar into the gap between the unit and the floor, ignoring the screech of metal on concrete. I threw my entire weight onto it, adrenaline burning away years of pampered inertia. The unit groaned, scraping sickeningly against the polished floor, moving inches. 5 seconds. The screeching stopped. I jammed my shoulder against the gap and shoved one last time, opening a man-sized crawl space. I scrambled into the darkness behind the unit, tearing skin on exposed wiring. I found the panel, old, dust-covered, with physical switches and an archaic microphone grill. 2 seconds. I leaned into the grill and yelled the fail-safe password I hadn't spoken aloud in a decade, a nonsensical string of ancient Greek and binary code that only I and the original system architect, now deceased, knew. Omega 101 Pulsar! The panel immediately lit up green, a single large red button labeled Hard Reset Core. 1 second. The alert on my wrist hit 0. Delta 7 went dark. The entire downtown grid choked, but in the basement the emergency analog systems kicked in, overriding the malicious command just as the power flickered violently overhead. I slammed the red button. The immediate terrifying surge of energy was contained within the basement walls. The malicious external command dissolved. The global infrastructure attack was aborted mid-initiation. Panting, leaning against the cooling unit, I waited for Marcus to confirm the all clear. He did, his voice thick with relief. I had saved the city, but at what cost? I looked down at my shaking hands. The threat of the fabricated national security charge, the one Maria had planted to force my compliance, was now very real because I had just initiated a highly irregular, unlogged shutdown of a key government-adjacent facility. They would investigate, and they would find my unauthorized access. I trudged back upstairs, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only exhaustion. Clara was still sleeping, quiet. The wooden bird remained on the table. When I finally reached the penthouse, Marcus was waiting, looking grim. "Sir, the authorities are demanding immediate communication regarding the Delta 7 spike. They're treating it like an attempted act of sabotage." "I know," I said, rubbing my temples. "We tell them the truth about the system compromise, the bizarre instructions, and the cleaner. They won't believe it, but we have to try." Just then, Clara stirred. She opened her eyes, perfectly clear, and reached for my hand. She squeezed it, a real strong grip. "Elias," she whispered, her voice strong, "don't worry about the charges. Maria didn't leave you defenseless." She tilted her head toward the wooden bird. She said, "When the net closes, the bird flies." I looked at the carving, then at the legal threat document. Suddenly, I understood. Maria hadn't just bought Clara time. She had established a protective countermeasure. The network that protects your investments wasn't my private security. It was the web of leverage she herself created. The supposed conspiracy charge was so outlandish, so specifically detailed, that it served as a powerful, mutually assured destruction clause. If they came after me for the illegal shutdown, I would reveal the blackmail attempt involving national infrastructure, forcing the government agencies involved to bury the entire investigation to avoid widespread panic about the vulnerability they didn't know they had. Maria hadn't just cleaned my house. She'd cleaned my slate by making my life so explosively dangerous that no one would dare touch me. I looked at Clara, seeing the life I thought I had lost shining brightly in her eyes, knowing the terrifying secret keeper had simply stepped back into the shadows, waiting for the next time the world needed a miracle, backed by calculated, exquisite threat. I was free, but I was now bound to a silence deeper than any contract.